A very warm welcome, everyone. My name is Axel Threlfall. I'm editor-at-large at Reuters, based out of London. It is a pleasure to be back hosting sessions of such importance at this forum on subjects I think it's fair to say have taken on a new, a fresh, a different sense of urgency over the past year or so. What is crystal clear on reading the ITF's latest outlook is that current transport decarbonisation policies are far from enough to get us where we need to be, and finding ways to fast track that decarbonisation must be a priority. Today's session hones in on three sectors: road freight, maritime and aviation, the so-called hardest to abate sectors, which together, I think I'm right in saying, account for just over 30% of global CO2 emissions. Lots and lots to talk about. We have another super panel lined up for you. What comes, by the way, from these discussions today will not only serve as a platform for action in the sectors themselves, but will also contribute, I'm told, to the transport and climate change dialogue taking place at COP26 in November. Before I introduce the panel, we're going to hear briefly from two other speakers. First up is the Secretary General of the ITF, Young Tai Kim, with some opening remarks. Young Tai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Axel. Dear Minister McLean, and dear colleagues and friends, it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to Decarbonizing Transport, Unlocking the Hard-to-Abate Sectors session today. We are all aware that current transport policies are inadequate to reduce carbon emissions, and the sector needs greater ambition to reach zero emissions by 2050. Our latest analysis shows that CO2 emissions from transport will increase by 16% to 2050, even if today's commitment to decarbonize transport are fully implemented. More ambitious transport decarbonization policies could reduce CO2 emissions by almost 70% by 2050 compared to 2015's level. But we need to act now, and act fast. Many of the policies to decarbonize transport are already available, but there are three sectors that are still facing massive challenges. They are the road freight, aviation, and maritime transport sectors. In this session, we will hear and learn from our distinguished speakers on how countries and companies can start reducing emissions from these three hard-to-abate sectors. We'll also hear more about the ITF's latest Decarbonizing Transport Driving Implementation Actions project, funded by the European Commission through Horizon 2020. This project will focus especially on innovative transport and mobility solutions that are capable of improving energy efficiencies and reducing emissions of CO2s and local pollutants in the transport sector, while being socially fair, fostering social inclusiveness and economic progress. The project will gather quantitative information, allowing to characterize these solutions. It will consider barriers for their development and adoption, and it will identify policy instruments available to effectively overcome them, leveraging on data, experiences, and lessons that involve country and other stakeholders leading the action on climate change mitigation and the achievement of sustainable development goals. A key feature of this project is the creation of common interest groups, allowing different stakeholder groups to learn and exchange information and knowledge on their best practices. Greater political ambition, collaboration, and cooperation are needed to implement and enforce necessary policies. Only stronger collaboration among major stakeholders will enable more ambitious climate actions as we learn from each other and create synergies, not just within the transport sector, but also beyond the sector, where greater cooperation is required to develop high-impact policies that are cross-cutting and effective in achieving multiple goals. Effective policies will thus need to be jointly developed with multiple stakeholders, especially when setting long-term decarbonizing transport goals and designing implementation strategies. The ITF serves as a platform to enable multiple stakeholders to engage in the policy dialogue on transport and climate change. Stakeholder engagement is part of the ITF Decarbonizing Transport Initiative, which was launched in 2016 after the signing of the Paris Agreement in 2015. Together with more than 70 partners, we are helping governments and industry transform their climate ambitions into actions. We are committed and will continue to provide decarbonizing transport policy insights through our extensive research, data analysis, and advanced modelings that cover road, rail, maritime, and aviation sectors. I welcome you joining us in this journey. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Young Tai. So there's the context, a little bit more of the context. There's a little bit more of the challenge. And there, of course, is that word collaboration again, and the desperate need for it across the board. And no doubt we'll talk more about it. Up next, we'll get an insight into the European Commission's transport climate goals and initiatives. Frank Smit is a policy officer in the research and innovation department at the Commission. Frank, the floor is yours.
Good morning, transport colleagues and friends. Good afternoon from Brussels. I'm happy to present at the ITF Annual Summit, and I would like to thank also the ITF for offering me the occasion to inform you about the European Commission's how they want to reduce decarbonization in transport with the help of the European Green Deal and the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy. Okay. Over the years, the European Commission and the International Transport Forum built up a close working relation. First example is the Decarbonisation Transport in Europe project, which provides European policymakers with better quantitative evidence on the actual impact of CO2 mitigation measures. Another example is the Decarbonisation Transport Driving Implementation Actions, where a key aim of the project is to create a favorable environment for the implementation of sustainable and inclusive transport policies and related policies beyond transport by strengthening the capacity of countries to adopt concrete and effective policy action. Both projects are funded by the European Union's Horizon 2020 program, and they fall within the scope of the ITF's Decarbonisation Transport Initiative. Why is this cooperation important? Well, the European Union needs to strengthen its dialogue with the international partners to build critical mass for tackling global challenges, and working together reduces the global burden, pools resources, and achieves greater impact. In December 2019, the European Commission took an historic step with the launch of the European Green Deal. For the first time, we are looking beyond the current policy and investment cycle to a time horizon of 2050, by when we aim to achieve climate neutrality in Europe. This commitment to climate neutrality by 2050 was enshrined in the climate law. The Green Deal is also an integral part of the Commission's strategy to implement the United Nations 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, when the Green Deal was launched, COVID-19 had not yet upended the planet. However, from the outset, the Green Deal was presented as our new growth strategy, and this has not changed. The European Union will spend about 1.8 trillion euro to help reboot the economy, and European leaders agreed that 30% of this should be allocated to climate objectives. The Green Deal is and remains the motor and compass of our recovery. Last September, we adopted the 2030 Climate Target Plan, which raises our greenhouse gas emission reduction target to at least 55% by 2030. The Commission's 55% climate target is not arbitrary, it's evidence-based. Okay, and then, sorry for this, brings me with research and innovation, which is an obvious enabler of the Green Deal transitions across all the major work streams, among which mobility. By developing, demonstrating, and deploying breakthrough innovation at scale, we can help to drive long-term systemic shifts beyond the normal policy, electoral, institutional, and investment cycles. Horizon Europe is integral to all of this. At least 35% of Horizon Europe's budget, around 95.5 billion euro, will be devoted to climate-related activities. Within Horizon Europe, Cluster 5, Climate, Energy and Mobility, aims to fight climate change by better understanding its causes, evolution, risks, impacts and opportunities, and by making energy and transport sectors more climate and environmental friendly, but also more efficient, competitive, smarter, safer and more resilient. There will be also a new wave of research and innovation partnerships across a range of key sectors, among which clean hydrogen, green aviation and waterborne transport, and many more. Finally, we also are proposing 4 Green Deal missions under Horizon Europe. One of them, 100 climate neutral cities by 2030, has a clear transport impact. They aim to foster ambitious long-term research and innovation in key areas. Active citizen participation here is a prerequisite. In September 2020, we launched the European Green Deal call. By creating and launching this call before the start of Horizon Europe, we are responding to the pressing need to confront the climate crisis and to provide greater protection to our environment and biodiversity. At the same time, the call addresses the urgent challenge of aiding Europe's recovery in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis, directly contributing to the EU's recovery plan, with the Green Deal at the center of the strategy. With a budget of 1 billion euro, it's a major cross-cutting call structured to reflect the priorities of the European Green Deal, with 10 areas encompassing 20 topics in total. The goal achieved an impressive response. Actions to achieve concrete milestones will keep the European transport system's journey towards a smart and sustainable future on track. For instance, by 2030, at least 30 million zero-emission cars will be in operation on European roads. 100 European cities will be climate neutral, and zero-emission marine vessels will be market-ready. By 2035, zero-emission large aircraft will be market-ready, and by 2050, nearly all cars, vans, buses, as well as new heavy-duty vehicles will be zero-emission. Fully operational multimodal trans-European transport network for sustainable and smart transport with high-speed connectivity will also be operational. The strategy also identifies a total of 82 initiatives in 10 key areas for actions called Flagships, each with concrete measures. For transport to become sustainable, in practice, it means that boosting the uptake of zero-emission vehicles, vessels and aeroplanes, renewable and low-carbon fuels and related infrastructure. For instance, by installing 3 million public charging points by 2030. Creating zero-emission airports and ports through, for instance, new initiatives to promote sustainable aviation and maritime fuels, or by making interurban and urban mobility healthy and sustainable. By also greening freight transport, for instance, by doubling rail freight traffic by 2050, and finally by pricing carbon and providing better incentives for users. There is also another series of actions which address then the smart aspect of transport, making connected and automated multimobility a reality, for instance, and also boosting innovation, the use of data and artificial intelligence for smarter mobility. An example here are the fully support of deployment of drones and unmanned aircrafts. Finally, under the resilience, in order also to make the sector more resilient to, for instance, events like COVID-19 pandemic, there are a set of actions addressing reinforcing the single market by reinforcing efforts and investments to complete the Trans-European Transport Network by 2030, or make mobility fair and just for all by making new mobility affordable, accessible in all regions and for all passengers, and making the sector also more attractive for workers. Finally, we want also to step up transport safety and security across all modes, including by bringing the death toll close to zero by 2050. And this brings me then with my conclusions. Okay, so ultimately, we need a massive scale up of social, governance, business, and technological innovation to enable the Green Deal transformation and setting us on a path to a cleaner, greener, fairer society and transport system. COVID-19 has only served to further highlight the urgent need for this fundamental transformation in how we do things. The ITF's Decarbonisation Transport Initiative, as well as the European Green Deal and Sustainable Smart Mobility Strategy, they all contribute to the same goal. The sooner we act, the sooner we and future generations will reap the benefits of a greener and more equitable society. Thank you.
All right, thanks to you as well, Frank Smith from the Commission. Right, let's move on to the panel discussion. And by the way, to our audience, if you have any questions, do send those through to the Q&A box. Start sending them through right now, and I'll try and weave as many of those as I can into the conversation as we go along. To our panelists, Rachel McLean is Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the UK's Department of Transport. Augustine Delgado is Chief Innovation and Sustainability Officer at Iberdrola. Julie Kitcher is Executive Vice President, Communications and Corporate Affairs at Airbus. Julie also leads the company's ambitions and contributions to sustainable aerospace. And Christoph Wolf is Head of Mobility Industries and System Initiative for the World Economic Forum. Welcome to all of you. I want to keep this as conversational, as pacey as I can. Rachel, if I could start sort of big picture with you, there is no doubt everyone involved recognizes the urgency.
Standards are under review can actually make a big step forward, because we have global OEMs, and they want to basically ideally have global standards.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you, Christoph. Many thanks for that opening gambit. Julie Kitcher from Airbus. Let's hear from some of the sectors now. Julie, Airbus has big ambitions on leading decarbonisation in the sector. You've got big ambitions on developing zero-emission commercial aircraft. What gives you most hope now, most optimism on this decarbonisation front? You know, what technologies and innovations, for example, are you most excited about?
Thanks, Alex. So hello, everybody, and thank you to the ITF. It's really a pleasure to be with you here today. I think first it's important to say, you know, we've heard it, we're a difficult to abate sector, but difficult to abate doesn't mean it's impossible to abate. And I think that's really key. And we've heard it a few times already. It needs collaboration. It needs the whole ecosystem. It needs a global energy transition as well. So we need to work together to a common goal. And so that's one of the things we're very optimistic about, because, you know, we may not yet have all the right frameworks in place and to get everybody working for a level playing field, but the momentum is very strong. And so I think we can be optimistic. I think aviation tends to be a scapegoat, and so it's important that we remind the world the importance of aviation, what it brings in terms of economic and social benefits, you know, because without the recovery of aviation, it's going to be difficult to have a global economic recovery, and that's what we need to tackle, you know, this generation's biggest challenge in terms of the climate challenge. Yeah. And so we're really optimistic when you look at the past in terms of the trajectory that we've come, the improvement. We've reduced CO2 emissions, for example, by 50% in the sector since the 1990s, which gives confidence and credibility as we look forward. And we're confident that although there's not one solution going forward to meet that net zero, you know, we're going to achieve it through a combination of measures. The first is obviously, and you touched on it, aircraft and engine technologies. And we see huge potential in hydrogen with a first zero emission aircraft, commercial aircraft, targeted for entry into service in the 2035 timeframe for those smaller aircraft, as well as permanent evolution on the technology side. If you think that today only 12% of the world's fleet of aircraft today is using the latest technology available. So the EU Green Deal, for example, and the incentivization to replace the older technology is going to be really key there as we head towards that net zero trajectory. On top, sustainable aviation fuels that could really achieve significant reductions. And I said it, global energy transformation. Today, our aircraft are certified to have a 50% sustainable aviation fuel drop through, but the lack of availability and the cost is just, really a limiting factor. So we need to work together on a global level to improve access. And of course, we've got global regulations and economic measures, for example, CORSIA offsetting, which will help us to the 2035 timeframe, and improvements in air traffic management to come. So in a nutshell, it really requires the total ecosystem to be aligned, from energy sector, power plant and systems, through to the way our customers operate their aircraft.
All right, and I'm going to come to the regulatory environment as well, and I'm going to come back to that in a sec. Quick follow up though, Julie. It looks like Airbus, tell me if I'm wrong, has hit peak emissions. I think I'm right in saying though that reflects offsets rather than actual reductions in emissions. Is that right?
Can you just clarify, Axel, what you mean by hit peak emissions?
Well, it's now going down from here.
Yeah, but so we disclosed our scope 3 emissions earlier this year, and it was really important to get a level playing field and understanding out there for the sector. So it's the first time it's been done. Actually, it's based on an annual level of deliveries and the life cycle of our aircraft. And so you're measuring 25 years of emissions from those 2019 deliveries. So that's why it's peak. What it doesn't take into account is the SAF capability, the trajectory to get, for example, to the EU destination 50 in terms of the new technologies and the aviation, the global offsetting, CORSIA, etc. So if you like, it's a kind of worst case scenario of those 2019 deliveries looking forward. So we see clear ways of improving that, moving along the trajectory.
Okay.
That's the worst case scenario.
Yeah. All right, Julie. Thanks. Let me come on to Augustine, if I could. Augustine, and we'll talk specifically global freight here and the electrification, I guess, of this sector. Lots, when I was researching this, lots and lots of roadmaps here, lots of possible solutions. In fact, for all of the sectors, which roadmaps appear to you the most realistic right now?
Well, for sure, it depends very much on what kind of transportation we are talking about, because there will be different solutions for different transportation. And even I would say that mobility ways the way of mobility will change even in the future. But if we look at roadmaps, for example, in the maritime transportation, it is not only just one solution for one application, but we have to recognize that there are different applications that can have different solutions. And I will explain a bit what I'm saying. If you look at the emissions and the energy consumption in the maritime transportation, you can see that, for example, there is a lot of emissions that is happening in the harbors, in the ports. So coal ironing, bringing electricity to the ports and the vessels that are in the ports and the harbors, it's going to be a solution to clean our cities and to reduce the consumption of the different vessels when they are not sailing. So I think electrification of that application when the vessels are at the port is a must, and is something that we are addressing today. For example, in Spain, vessels at port emits an amount of NOx, nitrogen oxides, equivalent to 1.2 million cars, and SOx, sulfur oxides, equivalent to 30 million cars. So addressing this problem is in our hands, and we can do it very easily. And then you have different applications when we talk about maritime transportation. You have short distance transportation like ferries, and we have seen that electrification is possible in these applications, and we will see more and more vessels being electrified. We can see also hybrid, so they will reduce emissions. But the truth it is that there are also some applications, I would say even those applications who consume more energy, that are long distance maritime transportation, that will need an energy carrier that somehow could be free of CO2. Yep. And for that applications, we think that there are some interesting steps that are being taken by the industry. And I would say that ammonia produced with hydrogen and nitrogen could be an interesting energy carrier for those vessels traveling long distances.
Mm-hmm. Let me jump in quickly, Augustine. What is the latest timing to scaling up replacements for fossil fuels in this sector, in the freight sector? When you talk about ammonia, you talk about hydrogen, you talk about electrification. What are the timings we're looking at here?
Yeah, for coal ironing in the harbors, I said at the very beginning, this is the low-hanging fruit. We can start doing it right now. And I think many ports, at least here in Spain, but some other countries will start the electrification of the ports. It's just a matter of investment.
Yeah.
No more than that. Second, for short distance transportation, electrification of those transportation is already happening. It will take a lot of time, but with the decrease of the cost of battery, probably it will happen in the next 5-10 years. For ammonia, we know that there are several engine manufacturers that are developing the ammonia engines, and the first ones will come in the first half of this decade, 2025 probably. And from that, we will see how everything works. We have to solve yet things related to emissions and toxicity and all these kind of things. But I think the technology is feasible, and we have to develop it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Augustine. Rachel, if I could come back to you, I want to, and specifically on aviation, I'll get Julie's views on this in a second as well. When it comes to the regulation, I wonder, are policy makers driving the agenda in the climate agenda in aviation, or is it more the airlines and the airline customers? And who should be driving that agenda?
Could you just sort of clarify what you mean a bit more?
When we look at the aviation space and what the role the regulator is expected to play, the role policy makers are expected to play, who ultimately makes the decisions in what happens in that space? How are the decisions driven? Are they driven by the airline, the feedback you get from the airline, from the customer, or is it the policymaker who will actually, at the end of the day, decide this might be about getting less people to fly, encouraging less flying, et cetera, et cetera? Who makes the call?
Yeah, okay. I think there's of course quite a lot in your question. Just to sort of target it on the decarbonisation and emission space, obviously government has a responsibility to set the policy framework in the way that we have legislated for net zero by 2050, and that does include all sectors, including aviation. It's not the case that we can sort of we've got some sectors that are easier to abate. It's not the case that we can just, if you like, give any sector a leeway to emit more because we know that others will take up the slack. And I know that the sector fully understands that, and we've heard from Julie as well about the potential of new technology. So I think clearly we have a role as policymakers and ministers from all countries to work in our own domestic space with our domestic suppliers and operators, and of course passengers and civil society to support this. But we also have to work internationally through forums like this and through ICAO and others to make sure that we drive these across the globe, because there is absolutely no point in one country having a very, very ambitious framework for reducing emissions from aviation when clearly it's an international sector and these emissions are happening all over the world. Ultimately, consumers and operators will play a part because we need the private sector to step up to invest in the technology which will help us to reach our ambitious goals. And of course, we do need consumers to sort of understand the implications of their choices that they make, not just in flying, but in every other area of their life. And we already see widespread support for people, people talking in that way.
Julie, let's get your perspective on this. I mean, who do you think should be driving the agenda, the climate agenda in aviation? And you know, what's Airbus's take on it?
Yeah, thanks, Axel, for the question. I mean, I can only really echo what Rachel said to a large extent, and that it's about collaboration. You know, industry needs to lead and can influence and really partner with policymakers. We need the policymakers, obviously, to make the right choices in terms of the regulatory framework for R&D funding, R&T funding, energy transformation. If you think about hydrogen, if electricity utilized in green solutions is not green sourced electricity, then we also have a problem. We don't resolve the problem. So I think it's really that the collaboration is key, and recognition, and I'm fortunate to be on the UK Jet Zero Council as well, recognition that we can have local movements, local solutions, but it's a global industry. Aviation is a global industry, and therefore we need a global framework that makes sense.
Yeah, I guess another thing I'm getting at here, and we talk, you know, clearly we talk a lot about collaboration and how key that is. I mean, Christoph, are the right conversations happening? Are the conversations that really need to be happening? Are they constructive conversations? You know, when we talk about Glasgow, do we talk about another round of conversations, or do we talk about another round of conversations that have actually produced concrete results?
Well, I think important for Glasgow is that the conversations largely have happened beforehand. Yeah, so I think Glasgow can basically seal those industry conversations that have landed on net zero transitions and the levers and the pathways how to get there. So the roadmaps actually need to be largely agreed on that before. And well, as a forum, we are basically the International Organization for Public-Private Collaboration. We heard a lot about collaboration, so it takes a whole ecosystem to do that. And it always takes the interplay for implementation between technology, policy, finance, and actually customer demand, offtake. Yeah, so people need to you know, no matter which technology we are talking here, if you're talking about sustainable aviation fuel are 2 or 3 times as expensive today at today's volumes than kerosene. Yeah? So if you multiply that, that means actually on a ticket price, even at a 10% blend, and the policy of the European Commission is moving towards a 5 to 10% blend. We think it should be a 10% blend by 2030. That actually means that actually each ticket is going to be a few percent more expensive, yeah, 2 or 3%, yeah, unless basically governments step in and say, give some subsidies, for example, tax breaks to those who actually finance and build the plants, which is actually then would take it on a level playing field. So it becomes actually an implementation conversation. Yeah. So it's I think it starts with the ambition, but the important is to actually implement. And what's very important are the next 5 years. Yeah. So I think we can talk a lot about net zero transition 2050. It's important to have medium milestones by 2030, and it's even more important to say what actually happens in the next 2 or 3 years, because we all agree this is a decade to deliver. So if you don't actually bend the curve and actually get, no matter if it's ammonia in shipping, if it's sustainable aviation fuel in aviation, or if it's basically hydrogen infrastructure or better electric infrastructure along the highways for trucks, if you don't actually get that ramped up very quickly, we won't see a net zero transition.
Just in terms of, just on the back of something you said, in terms of strategic policy intervention, and because clearly this is a part of this conversation, when do you think realistically we can expect a level playing field with a carbon price as part of that level playing field, and the right mechanism in place to decide that price?
Well, I think it's agreed among everybody that carbon price alone is not going to solve it, because actually I mean, you basically need carbon prices north of 200 basically dollars per ton CO2 in order to set basically a level playing field just by carbon pricing. Yeah, so that we won't get there. Now we are at 50 when we used to be at $5 like 3 years ago. So that, and eventually that will take over. But for the time, in order to get started, and as I said, the next couple of years are decisive. We need additional policies. Yeah, so the EU blending mandate is important. Working actually with 193 countries to get the long-term goal at ICAO, if you take aviation, is also important. So I think the action in the next 2 or 3 years are really important to set the stage, and to deliver on what, for example, the One World Alliance has been pledging, or what Maersk has been pledging in shipping, and so on. So there's a lot of dynamics and action from corporates, but in order to actually move this at a global scale, policy action is required.
Augustine, you touched on this before, but with wearing your, I believe you're responsible for the VC program at Iberdrola as well. I'd be interested to hear where most of the investment in tech is going now. With a focus on sustainable energy. What is exciting the investors most right now, would you say?
Well, I think that there are two fields in which there is a lot of movement right now in the investment side. First, it is about, for sure, the cars or the motorbikes or the trucks or whatever. So there is a lot of movement in this regard. Linked to that, there is a lot of movement to everything that is related to batteries. And I would say there are like two trends. First is the business as usual batteries, reducing costs through scale and through innovation of the big companies, and those companies that want to somehow go for the next generation of batteries that could help somehow increase density or decrease costs and so on. Mm-hmm. So this is in one side. In the other side, I would like to talk about infrastructure. All the charging infrastructure, I think, is getting a lot of attention and traction. It is true that until we don't reach a certain level of fleet, making money with infrastructure is very difficult. But the truth is that those who are investing in infrastructure right now will somehow take the best positions in the roads, in the malls, in those spots where it's going to happen, most probably the charging. And so we can see that there is a lot of movement, a lot of activity in companies that are trying to create a business model out of this infrastructure. And this is both sides, in the hardware and also in the software, providing services to the customers that are linked to the use of the vehicles.
Julie, you talked briefly about zero emission commercial aircraft, electric planes. Realistically, when can we see a commercial aircraft cross the Atlantic, would you say? You're probably asked this all the time, but what are you telling people now?
Well, look, our priority for a zero emission aircraft, commercial aircraft in 2035 is really, it's going to be about short and medium haul. So let's see what it means in terms of ultimate range and how we can go point to point. What's really important is that, again, as I said it, we go on the basket of measures. There's not one single solution that's going to resolve the topic, and that's why sustainable aviation fuels are so important. That's why carbon, the incentivization schemes are so important, and that we can really tackle, all of the levers to be able to get there. Let's go step by step. We've got our ambitions, and yeah, I'm pretty confident that we can really make a difference.
All right. Look, a question comes in from the audience, and it's a question that we've thrown around a lot over the past year. The impact of COVID, has it opened up opportunities, or do you see a reversion to the norm, if you like? In transport, of course, we talk a lot with mayors across the world about people jumping into their cars and staying away from public transport, which is not a good thing for climate, of course, in cities. Rachel, what do you think? Very quickly, pandemic is an opportunity, or do you think we're overplaying that opportunity a little bit?
I think it's a huge question. I think the pandemic is an opportunity, and we in this government are determined to grasp it. We have a number of objectives and policies that we're working through to do just that. We've touched on a few of them today. But I also do think that we have to be quite optimistic in one way, because we know that we are social creatures and we all crave that social contact, whether it's in the workplace or traveling abroad, seeing family and friends, all of those things. Most people are desperate to get back to that. Of course, there will be changes, and we have to capitalise on them.
Yeah, and of course, I imagine, Christoph, part of the opportunity we heard from Frank and the Commission and the new Green Deal, and part of the opportunity is getting hold of the cash that's on offer now, and that window will ultimately close, right?
Yeah, so the Green Deal is a huge opportunity, and actually also a huge investment. Yeah, so. And I think Europe actually, as a front runner and setting a model for the world, I think needs to play a huge role. But I think we also need to be clear. I mean, we are really talking about global challenges. Yeah. So, and for example, in aviation, I think there has been, like 2 years ago, we said, flight shaming, we shouldn't fly at all. I think it's an equity question. I think there's literally billions of people that haven't flown before. Yeah, so that need to be connected to the world. Yeah, so, and I think we owe it to them to make flying sustainable. Yeah, so and net zero and enable growth and connectedness of the world. I think if the world learned one thing in COVID, it's important to stay connected, because if everybody basically does Zoom conferences all day long, at some stage, actually, that is not the way forward. Yeah, so I think we're kind of all longing around the globe to be connected again, and that needs mobility.
Yeah, I mean, although I got to say the words of the UN Secretary General ring around my head when he said, in September, if world leaders deal with climate the way they dealt with COVID, then we're all in deep trouble, right? I guess as a context, so maybe that collaboration is coming. Julie, there's a specific follow-on for you from someone in the audience on innovation, and in particular hydrogen and collaboration, the spirit of collaboration. Air transport, the question is this: air transport would only be a smaller part of a hydrogen economy. Does Airbus actively engage with other industries, ground transport, space, to create an effective production and distribution system for hydrogen?
This is exactly my point, and we really need wider collaboration. And I think the COVID has presented our industry with a huge challenge, but at the same time now, let's take this opportunity of the crisis to really accelerate the decarbonisation ambition. And
maybe Rachel is in response to this question. In the UK, many investment firms and banks still invested heavily in ongoing and future coal development.
It's less than 20 years. Yeah, so I think it's it's a huge opportunity for this generation to basically put together technology, initiative and entrepreneurial initiative, policy and finance to make that happen.
Okay, Augustin, again with investment in mind and innovation in mind, does Iberdrola feel confident that you're looking at some of these roadmaps that I mentioned that will hit the targets?
I think so.
In global freight in particular?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as I said, that we are confident about the technology. We are seeing a right pace of the development of the technology. We are keen to invest in infrastructure that will enable to transform the whole mobility sector and to change the daily uses of energy from sources that emit CO2 to those that doesn't. So we are really confident. We think the roadmaps are there, and that I feel that the objectives with the right investments, the right political decisions, and the right companies and the right public-private partnership can be achieved.
Okay, good. And Julie, a final word from you. How long do you think it's going to be? And what will you have to achieve before that scapegoat tag for aviation falls away, do you think?
Well, I think obviously it's about general public perception as well, and educating generations to understand that actually without aviation, economic recovery is not going to come, at least not the way we need it to. And we need that the transformation needs to be funded by that economic recovery. And it's also about explaining, reminding that actually aviation is the only means of regular transport that doesn't touch the Earth's biodiversity. We fight over it. So yes, there is a CO2 topic. You know, it's a big deal, and we're taking our responsibility. And if we work collectively, we can really get that route to net zero in the 2050, 2060 timeline.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thanks, Julie. I'm going to leave my thanks for just a couple of minutes, because I want to hand the mic, if you like, to Jari Kaupila, who is head of the ITF Secretary General's office. And he's going to talk very briefly, a couple of minutes, on next steps and driving implementation, making this stuff happen that we've been talking about, I guess. Jari, over to you.
Thank you very much, Axel and Minister colleagues. It has been really a pleasure to listen to this excellent discussion. And I have to say, more so from the city of Leipzig, where it feels great to be back here for this second week of the ITF summit. So how can ITF help in moving forward from ambition to action for the hard to abate sectors and really tackle some of those really good points? Before, we have just launched a new European Commission funded project, Driving Implementation Action. And I really want to take this opportunity just to very briefly thank the European Commission for this second joint project that we have as part of the Horizon 2020 program of work. This project is the newest addition to ITF's Decarbonising Transport work. It starts as a 2-year project with an idea of really scaling up innovative solutions rapidly. To join these groups in our joint effort to decarbonize transport. And finally, we also invite you to join us at the COP26 in Glasgow, where we will be organizing a side event specifically with focus on maritime, aviation, and road freight. So I hope this very short overview gave a good overview of how we at the ITF will move forward on the topic and how we want to support our members and the global transport community in decarbonizing the transportation sector. So thank you very much, and back to you, Axel.
All right, Jari, thank you. And one really quick question to you as my wrap, I guess. Does the ITF feel that this conversation is moving on, is moving in the right direction, is making progress?
Absolutely. I do think that we do see a concrete, we've had a lot of ambition so far. And I think the global community is now moving from that ambition to action. And this is something we know we need. We need targets, we need concrete measures. And this discussion, but also the discussions we had with our global stakeholders, shows that there really is that move towards that action and concrete measures. Okay. But there's an urgency, as we've said.
Yeah. All right, Jari, thanks very much indeed. Look, I'm not going to add anything else. I think we touched on a lot of issues there. Clearly collaboration, clearly global frameworks, clearly level playing fields are phrases, sort of leitmotifs, if you like, we're going to continue hearing. It remains for me to thank everyone. Rachel McLean, Augustin Delgado, Julie Kitcher, and Christoph Wolf. Thank you, all of you, for your insights. Really good to get a diverse group like this together from different sectors, from government, etc. So many thanks for helping move the conversation on. Hopefully we'll see you all in Glasgow towards the end of the year. And my thanks to you as well, the audience, for your questions. Keep them coming through. I'm Axel Threlfall. Very nice to see you all. Hope to see you next year.